I'm Emily, 32 female. I live in a small, tidy apartment in the city, a place that has always felt more like a temporary station than a home. By day, I'm a human resources coordinator, a job that requires a delicate balance of empathy and procedure, skills I've unfortunately had to perfect in my personal life as well. For as long as I can remember, I've been the designated fixer, the free babysitter, and the on-call therapist for my entire family. But when I was the one who desperately needed help, my frantic calls were met with a silence so profound it shattered the illusion of family I had clung to for years. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My role in the family was cemented early on. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who never made a fuss. My older sister, Sarah, was the star, the one with the dazzling smile and a personality that drew people in, only to wear them out. Her husband, Tom, was a financial advisor who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. It was clear from the start which category I fell into. And my mother, Carol, was the gentle enabler, a retired teacher who preached fairness but practiced appeasement, always smoothing over Sarah's sharp edges at my expense. Our family operated on an unspoken contract. I gave and they took. It started with small things in our teenage years. I'd finish Sarah's homework so she could go to a party, or lend her my savings for a concert, which I was never paid back for. Mom would just smile and say, "That's what sisters do for each other, sweetie." But the exchange was always one way. When I needed a ride home or help studying for my own exams, Sarah was suddenly too busy, her social calendar a fortress I couldn't breach. As we grew into adults, the demands escalated. When Sarah and Tom had their first child, then their second, I became their default babysitter. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. "Emily, we have a dinner thing on Friday," Sarah would announce, not ask. "The kids will be excited to see you." My own plans were irrelevant. If I ever tried to say no, explaining that I had work or was feeling unwell, my mother would call. "Oh, Emily, don't be like that," she'd say, her voice laced with disappointment. "Sarah has so much on her plate. You don't have kids, you don't understand how hard it is." And so, my weekends were filled with sticky hands, Disney movies, and the exhaustion of chasing after two energetic toddlers. I loved my niece and nephew, but I was becoming a ghost in my own life. I was their unpaid nanny, their chauffeur, their emergency contact. I cooked them dinner, helped with homework, and tucked them into bed, all while Sarah and Tom were out enjoying their lives, building their social standing, and posting filtered photos of their perfect family online. They never offered to pay me, not even for gas. My compensation was the occasional, "The kids just adore you," thrown my way as they breezed back in, smelling of expensive perfume and wine. The emotional labor was just as draining. I was the family's therapist. Sarah would call me in a panic about some trivial argument she'd had with a fellow lifestyle blogger, expecting me to drop everything and listen for an hour. Tom would complain to me about the stress of his job, using me as a sounding board for his frustrations because Sarah didn't have the patience for it. My mother would call to vent about both of them, lamenting Sarah's spending habits or Tom's long hours, but never actually doing anything to address the issues. I was the repository for all their anxieties, their complaints, their secrets. Yet no one ever asked about me. My triumphs at work went uncelebrated. My struggles were dismissed. Once I tried to talk to my mom about feeling overwhelmed, about the pressure of being everything to everyone. She patted my hand and said, "You're so strong, Emily. I don't know what we'd do without you." It was meant to be a compliment, but it felt like a life sentence. Strong meant I didn't need support. Strong meant I could carry their burdens without complaint. The summer before everything changed, my grandfather, my mom's dad, passed away. He was the only one who ever saw me. He lived a few states away, but he called every Sunday. He'd ask about my job, my hobbies, my friends. He listened, truly listened. His death left a gaping hole in my life. The family, of course, needed me to manage the logistics of the funeral. I booked the flights, coordinated the service, and wrote the eulogy, all while choking back my own grief. Sarah was too distraught to help, Tom was too busy with work, and Mom was, in her own words, a complete wreck. I did it all, running on fumes and sorrow, because that was my job. After the funeral, we gathered at my grandfather's small house. It was there that the family's vacation cabin first became a point of contention. The cabin, nestled by a lake in the mountains, had been in the family for generations. It was my grandfather's favorite place on earth, and he'd spent his last few years meticulously renovating it. Sarah immediately started talking about all the summer vacations they'd take there with the kids. "It's going to be so great," she said, scrolling through her phone, probably looking for rustic chic decor ideas. "We'll need to set up a schedule, of course. We'll probably take most of July and August. Emily, you can have a week in September, maybe." Tom nodded in agreement. "It's a valuable asset. We need to be smart about its use." I just stood there, invisible again. It never occurred to them to ask me what I wanted. It was assumed that I would get the scraps of time left over after they had taken their fill. That was the unspoken contract, after all. I existed to facilitate their lives, to fill in the gaps, to be the constant, reliable, and endlessly giving foundation upon which they built their happiness. And for 32 years, I had played my part without question, blind to the fact that the foundation was cracking under the weight of their relentless demands. I didn't know it yet, but a storm was coming, one that would finally bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday. It started as a dull ache in my side that morning, which I dismissed as a muscle cramp. As an HR coordinator, my days were often a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and mediating employee disputes. I was used to pushing through discomfort, but by lunchtime, the ache had sharpened into a stabbing pain that radiated through my abdomen. I broke out in a cold sweat, my vision blurring at the edges. I stumbled to the office restroom, clutching my side, and collapsed against the cool tile of the wall, gasping for breath. Something was seriously wrong. My mind raced, and primal fear, cold and sharp, cut through the haze of pain. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. My first instinct, the one conditioned by a lifetime of duty, was to call my family. I called Sarah first. It went straight to voicemail. "Voicemail is full," a robotic voice announced. Of course, it was. She probably had dozens of messages from PR people and brand collaborators. Panic began to set in. I tried Tom. He answered on the second ring, his voice clipped and impatient. "Emily, I'm in the middle of a client meeting. What is it?" "Tom, something's wrong," I gasped, the words catching in my throat. "I'm in so much pain. I think I need to go to the hospital." There was a pause, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I heard a flicker of concern. I was wrong. "Can this wait?" he sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance. "I'm about to close a big deal here. Just call your mother. I'll text Sarah to check on you later." Before I could protest, he hung up. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I dialed my mother, my last hope. She was the one who was supposed to care, the one who always said, "Family comes first." The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, she picked up. "Emily, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice distant. I could hear the cheerful chatter of children in the background. "Mom, no," I cried, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm at work and I'm in incredible pain. I need help. I think I need to go to the ER." "Oh dear," she said, but her tone was distracted. "Are you sure it's not just bad cramps? You always get those." "Listen, I can't really talk right now." Sarah dropped the kids off unexpectedly. Apparently, she and Tom got a last-minute invitation to a gallery opening, and I'm in the middle of making macaroni and cheese. The casualness of her dismissal was a physical blow. Macaroni and cheese, a gallery opening. These were the things that took precedence over her daughter's desperate plea for help. "Mom, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "I'm scared. I can't drive like this." "Just take some ibuprofen and lie down for a bit, sweetie," she said, her voice softening into that familiar, placating tone she used whenever she wanted to end a difficult conversation. "I'm sure it will pass. I have to go. The kids are making a mess. Call me back in a bit if you're still not feeling well." And then she was gone. The line went dead, and I was left with a silence that was more painful than the searing agony in my side. A deafening, absolute silence. The people I had dedicated my life to, the ones for whom I had sacrificed my time, my energy, and my own well-being, hadn't just been unavailable. They had been dismissive. My crisis was an inconvenience, a disruption to their far more important lives. The illusion shattered. The unspoken contract was void. It had never been about love or family or mutual support. It had been about utility. I was useful, so they kept me around. Now, in my meant of desperate need. When I was no longer the giver but the one who needed something, I was a liability. A colleague, a kind woman from the accounting department named Linda, found me slumped on the floor a few minutes later. She took one look at my pale, sweat-drenched face and didn't hesitate. She called 911, held my hand while we waited, and told me everything was going to be okay. A stranger was showing me more compassion than my own family had. I was rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis came quickly, a ruptured appendix. It was critical. I was prepped for emergency surgery, a whirlwind of nurses, doctors, and consent forms. As they wheeled me into the operating room, my last conscious thought was of the silence on the other end of the phone. It echoed in my ears, louder than the beeping of the heart monitor, a final, brutal confirmation of a truth I had spent my entire life avoiding. I was utterly, completely alone. The surgery was successful, but my recovery was slow. I spent 3 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of a haze of pain medication. In all that time, my phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, not a single "Are you okay?" from my sister, my brother-in-law, or my mother. Linda from accounting, however, visited me every day. She brought magazines, a fresh set of pajamas, and a warmth that made me cry with gratitude. On the 3rd day, a text finally came through from Sarah. It read, "Hey, Mom said you weren't feeling well. Hope you're okay. BTW, can you pick up the kids from soccer on Thursday? Tom and I have our anniversary dinner." I stared at the message until the words blurred. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of it was breathtaking. I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from major surgery, and she was asking me for a favor. Not only that, she was asking me to facilitate the very anniversary dinner that was likely more important than my health. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, decisive click, like a lock falling into place. The Emily who would have replied, "Of course," was gone. The Emily who would have felt guilty for saying no was gone. The Emily who believed in the fantasy of her family was gone. In her place was a woman who had been pushed to the edge and had finally, blessedly, found her footing. I typed out a reply, my fingers steady. "No." I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't mention the surgery or the hospital. I didn't scold her for her negligence. I just gave her the one word I had been denied my entire life. The one word that would be the start of my new foundation. "No." I turned off my phone, sank back into the starchy hospital pillows, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt a profound sense of peace. The silence was no longer deafening. It was liberating. I was discharged from the hospital on a Friday, weak and sore, but with a clarity of mind I hadn't felt in years. Linda insisted on driving me home, fussing over me like a mother hen, making sure I was settled in with food, water, and my medication schedule written out on a notepad. Her kindness was a stark contrast to the echoing silence from my family, a silence that had stretched, unbroken, for 5 days. The first few days at home were a blur of sleep and slow, painful walks around my apartment. I kept my phone off, shielding myself from the inevitable onslaught of guilt-tripping texts and calls that I knew would come once my "no" had been processed. I needed this time to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. I was mourning the loss of a family I had only ever had in my imagination. By the following week, I was starting to feel more like myself. The physical pain was subsiding, replaced by a slow-burning anger. I needed a distraction, something to focus on other than the gaping wound my family had left in my life. That's when I remembered the boxes from my grandfather's house. After the funeral, in the rush to clear out his home, I had packed up a few boxes of his personal effects, photo albums, old books, and stacks of letters, and stored them in the back of my closet, intending to go through them when I had the emotional energy. Now felt like the right time. I dragged a dusty cardboard box into my living room, the tape groaning in protest as I pulled it open. The familiar, comforting smell of old paper and cedar filled the air. On top was a stack of photo albums. I spent an hour flipping through the pages, smiling at pictures of a younger me with my grandfather at the lake cabin, him teaching me how to skip stones, me with a proud grin holding up a tiny fish I had caught. He was the one person who had always made me feel seen, cherished, and important. The grief was still sharp, but it was mingled with a profound sense of gratitude for having had him in my life at all. Beneath the albums were bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon. Most were from his time in the army, love letters to my grandmother. But at the very bottom of the box, tucked into a large manila envelope, was something different. The envelope was thick and brittle with age. My name, Emily, was written across the front in my grandfather's familiar, spidery cursive. My heart quickened. I had never seen this before. I carefully opened the flap, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a smaller, sealed envelope and a thick sheaf of official-looking documents held together with a rusty paperclip. I opened the sealed envelope first. It was a letter dated just 6 months before he passed away. "My dearest Emily," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. I hope my passing was peaceful, and I hope you are not grieving too deeply. You have always been a sensitive soul, my dear, and you carry the weight of the world and your family on your shoulders. That is what this letter is about. I am not blind, Emily. I have watched you for years. I have seen how you give, and how your sister, your brother-in-law, and even your mother take and take. I have seen them treat you not as a cherished daughter or sister, but as a convenience. They rely on your strength but do nothing to replenish it. They demand your time but place no value on it. It has broken my heart to watch, but I knew that a man of my age interfering would only make things harder for you. You had to see it for yourself. I suspect that if you are reading this now, it is because you finally have. I have worried for years about what would happen to the cabin after I was gone. It is more than just wood and nails to me. It is a legacy. It's a place of peace, of quiet reflection, of happy memories. It is everything I have ever wanted for you. I cannot bear the thought of it becoming another one of Sarah's playthings, another backdrop for her social media posts, another asset for Tom to manage. It is meant to be a sanctuary, and a sanctuary is what you need. That is why I have taken certain steps. The documents in this envelope are important. Do not let anyone else see them. Take them to a lawyer, a good one. I have left a name and number for you at the end of this letter. He will know what to do. You are a wonderful, kind, and resilient young woman, Emily. You deserve to be cherished. You deserve a place where you can be a priority. You deserve to be the one who is cared for, not the one who is always doing the caring. Use what I have left you. Build a new foundation for yourself, one that is not built on the needs and demands of others. Live a life that is your own. Be happy. Know that your old grandfather loved you more than words can say. All my love. Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I read the letter, blurring the ink. They were tears of grief, but also of validation. He had seen it all. He had understood. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being selfish or overly sensitive, as my family had so often made me feel. I had been exploited, and my grandfather, in his quiet wisdom, had known it all along. With a renewed sense of purpose, I picked up the other documents. The top page was a copy of my grandfather's will. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes searching for any mention of the cabin. I found the section easily. It stated that his primary residence and his savings were to be divided equally between his 2 daughters, my mother Carol and my aunt. But then there was a separate clause, a codicil, that specifically addressed the cabin. Attached to the will was another document, a quitclaim deed. My legal knowledge was limited, but I understood the basics. It was a legal instrument used to transfer interest in real property. And this one, signed, dated, and notarized a year before his death, transferred full ownership of the property known as the lakefront cabin from him to me, Emily. Sole ownership. My breath hitched. It wasn't part of the estate to be divided. It wasn't family property to be scheduled and fought over. It was mine. He had given it to me, and only me. The final document was a letter from his lawyer, explaining that the original deed had been filed with the county clerk's office and was legally binding. The property had been mine for over a year, and no one knew it but me and my grandfather's lawyer. I sat back on the floor, the documents spread out before me, a whirlwind of emotions swirling in my chest. Grief, gratitude, anger, and a fierce, protective love for the man who had given me not just a piece of property, but a way out. He had given me a key, a fortress, a sanctuary. He had given me a choice. The dusty box had held more than just old photos and letters. It held my liberation. For the first time, I had something that was mine, something they couldn't touch, something they couldn't demand or take. And as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, a plan began to form. It wasn't a plan for petty revenge, not at first. It was a plan for survival. A plan to build the new foundation my grandfather had written about. But I knew, with a certainty that set. T-led deep in my bones, that when my family finally decided to break their silence, they were not going to like the new rules. The constant giver was about to become the gatekeeper. The morning after my discovery, I woke up with a singular focus. The first thing I did was call the lawyer my grandfather had recommended. His name was Arthur Vance, an old-school attorney with a calm, reassuring voice that immediately put me at ease. I explained who I was and the documents I had found. "Ah, yes, Emily," he said, a warmth in his tone. "Your grandfather spoke very highly of you. He was a very meticulous man. He wanted to ensure there were no ambiguities regarding his wishes for the cabin. He was adamant that it go to you and you alone. The quitclaim deed is ironclad. The property is legally and entirely yours. It is not part of the probate estate, so your mother and sister have no claim to it whatsoever." The confirmation sent a wave of relief through me. "What do I do now?" I asked. "No one in my family knows about this." "That is entirely up to you," Arthur advised. "Legally, you have no obligation to inform them at all. The property taxes are in your name, and my office has been paying them from a trust account your grandfather set up for that exact purpose for the first 2 years. He truly thought of everything. My advice? Bide your time. Let them show their hand. Your grandfather's intention was for this to be your sanctuary, not another source of conflict." His advice resonated with me. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. I was still healing, still building my strength. So I decided to follow his counsel. I would keep my secret, my ace in the hole, until the time was right. A week later, my family finally broke their silence. It began, as I expected, with my mother. She called on a Saturday morning. I let it ring for a while before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "Emily, you finally answered your phone," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and reproach. "We've been so worried. Why haven't you been answering?" I kept my voice calm and neutral. "I've been recovering." "Recovering? From what?" "Sarah said you weren't feeling well," she said, the lack of information in her possessions speaking volumes. "I had to have emergency surgery," I said plainly. "My appendix ruptured." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she processed the information and, more importantly, her own negligence. "Surgery," she finally squeaked. "Oh my goodness, why didn't you tell us? We would have been there." The lie was so blatant, so self-serving that I almost laughed. "I did tell you, Mom. I called you from my office right before I collapsed. You were busy making macaroni and cheese for Sarah's kids." I let the statement hang in the air, the indictment clear and undeniable. She stammered, trying to backtrack to justify. "Oh, Emily, I had no idea it was that serious. You know how you sometimes exaggerate about cramps. If I had known." But you didn't, I cut in, my voice cold. And you didn't bother to call back to check either. None of you did. Her defensiveness quickly curdled into guilt-tripping. Well, I'm sorry, but we're not mind readers, Emily. You can't expect us to drop everything for a little stomach ache. Sarah has been so stressed with her blog, and Tom is under immense pressure at work. The familiar script, the well-worn excuses had lost their power. They were just words, hollow and meaningless. I don't expect anything from any of you anymore, I said, and the truth of that statement felt like a weight lifting from my chest. I have to go, Mom. I'm glad we cleared that up. I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The conversation had been exactly what I needed. It was the final nail in the coffin of my old life, the final confirmation that my decision to distance myself was the right one. A few hours later, Sarah called. Her tone was a stark contrast to my mother's. She was furious. "What is your problem, Emily?" she snapped, without so much as a hello. "You have Mom all upset, accusing her of ignoring you, and you left me in a complete bind on Thursday. We had to cancel our anniversary dinner because you couldn't be bothered to do one simple thing for me." I leaned back on my sofa, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. It was like watching a movie I had seen 100 times before. I was in the hospital, Sarah, recovering from surgery. "So, you could have texted," she retorted, the complete lack of empathy staggering. "I had that reservation for weeks. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get a table there?" "I'm sorry your dinner plans were ruined," I said, my voice dripping with an irony that was completely lost on her. My near-death experience was very inconsiderate of me. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "You're fine, aren't you? Look." "Whatever, about the cabin. Tom and I have been looking at the calendar, and we're booking out the last 3 weeks of July. We're having some friends up, so just make sure you don't plan anything for then." And there it was. The entitlement, the assumption, the complete disregard for me as a person with my own life and desires. It was the perfect opening, the perfect cue for my grandfather's ghost to make its appearance. "That's not going to work for me," I said calmly. Sarah was taken aback. "What do you mean, it's not going to work for you? We've already invited people. It's a family cabin, Emily. We all share it." "Actually, no," I said, the words feeling powerful and true on my tongue. "We don't." "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "The cabin is family property, Sarah," I explained, savoring each word. "Grandpa left it to me. To me alone, it's my property. He signed the deed over to me more than a year ago." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with disbelief and fury. I could practically hear her mind short-circuiting as she tried to process what I had just told her. "You're lying," she finally hissed. "That's not true. Mom is the executor of his will. We would know." "It wasn't in the will," I said, channeling Arthur Vance's calm authority. "It was a quitclaim deed filed with the county. It's a legally binding document that supersedes anything in the will. The cabin is mine, Sarah, and you are not welcome there." I could hear her sputtering, a string of incoherent, angry noises. "You can't do this. I'm going to call Mom. I'm going to call a lawyer." "You do that," I said, a smile finally touching my lips. "My lawyer's name is Arthur Vance. I'm sure he'd be happy to explain the legal realities to you. Have a nice day." I hung up the phone, my hand completely steady. The first shot had been fired. I had laid my claim not just to a piece of property, but to my own life. I knew this was just the beginning. The storm was about to break in full force. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. My grandfather had given me a sanctuary, and I was going to defend it with everything I had. And in doing so, I was finally, truly, defending myself. The fallout from my phone call with Sarah was immediate and spectacular. Within an hour, my phone was besieged by a coordinated assault. My mother called, crying, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Tom left a series of increasingly aggressive voicemails, threatening legal action and calling me a vindictive, selfish child. Sarah, after her initial sputtering rage, resorted to sending a barrage of venomous texts, filled with insults and accusations. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a symphony of guilt, intimidation, and emotional blackmail. The old Emily would have crumbled. She would have apologized, backtracked, and tried to smooth things over, probably by offering them a key and a generous vacation schedule just to make the conflict stop. But the old Emily was gone. I read and listened to their messages with a strange, clinical detachment. Their words, once so powerful, now seemed pathetic. They weren't angry because I had inherited the cabin. They were angry because they had lost control. They had lost their most valuable asset, not the property, but me. I followed Arthur's advice and refused to engage. I didn't answer their calls or respond to their texts. I let them rage against a wall of silence, the very same wall they had built around me when I was the one in crisis. Instead, I focused on my next steps. The cabin was my sanctuary, and it was time to claim it. The following weekend, I felt strong enough to make the 3-hour drive up to the lake. As I drove, with each mile that separated me from the city and the toxic drama of my family, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The air grew cleaner, the scenery greener, and by the time I turned onto the long, gravel driveway that led to the cabin, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, a sturdy 2-story structure of dark wood and stone, nestled amongst a grove of pine trees, overlooking the sparkling blue water of the lake. It was simple, rustic, and beautiful. It was home. I had the new set of keys Arthur had sent me, cut from the copies my grandfather had left with him. The old family key, the one that hung on a hook in my mother's kitchen, was now useless. As I approached the front door, I saw that someone had tried to use it. There were fresh scratches on the wood around the old lock, which I had paid a locksmith to replace the day before. They had already been here. They had already tried to assert their non-existent authority. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but it also hardened my resolve. I slid my new key into the new lock. It turned smoothly, with a satisfying click. The sound echoed in the quiet mountain air, a sound of finale. Tie of ownership. The inside of the cabin was just as I remembered, only more so. My grandfather's presence was everywhere, in the worn leather of his favorite armchair by the stone fireplace, in the collection of dog-eared paperback novels on the bookshelf, in the faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco and wood smoke. It was clean and orderly. He had left it in perfect condition. I spent the rest of the day simply being in the space. I walked through each room, running my hand along the familiar wooden furniture. I sat on the wide porch that overlooked the lake, watching the sunlight dance on the water. I felt the tension of the past few weeks begin to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. This was my place. My grandfather had made sure of it. That evening, I built a fire in the fireplace, poured myself a glass of wine, and curled up in my grandfather's armchair. It was then that I noticed a small, framed photograph on the mantelpiece that I hadn't seen before. It was a picture of me and him, taken on this very porch years ago. I was about 10 years old, beaming with pride as I held up a string of fish. He was standing behind me, his hands on my shoulders, his face crinkled into a warm, loving smile. Looking at that photo, I knew what I had to do. This cabin wasn't just a refuge, it was a responsibility. It was a legacy of love and quiet strength that I had to protect. My family didn't understand that legacy. To them, the cabin was a status symbol, a free vacation spot, a thing to be used. They would never appreciate its true value. My plan, which had started as a simple act of self-preservation, began to evolve into something more. It was no longer enough to just keep them out. I had to make them understand, once and for all, that the dynamic had changed forever. The unspoken contract was not just void, it was being ceremoniously burned in the hearth of my new home. The next morning, I drove to the nearby town and bought a few things: a new sign for the driveway, a can of wood stain, and some flowers to plant in the window boxes. When I returned, I got to work. I took down the old, faded sign that read "The Family Cabin" and replaced it with a new, beautifully carved wooden sign. It read simply, "Emily's Place." The act was symbolic, but it felt monumental. I was literally rewriting the narrative, claiming my space not just legally, but emotionally and physically. I spent the rest of the weekend working, staining the porch railings, pulling weeds from the small garden, and making the place my own. With every small act of care, I felt myself growing stronger, more rooted. Before I left on Sunday evening, I did one last thing. I wrote a short, simple email and sent it to my mother, Sarah, and Tom. Subject: the cabin. To be clear, the cabin and the surrounding property are now under my sole ownership. The locks have been changed, and security cameras have been installed. Any attempt to access the property will be considered trespassing and will be reported to the local authorities. The property is no longer a communal family asset. It is a private residence. There will be no more discussions on this matter. Emily. I hit send without a moment's hesitation. It was a declaration of independence, a final, unambiguous severing of the ties of expectation and obligation that had bound me for so long. As I drove back to the city, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt free. I had turned the key, not just to a cabin, but to a new life, one where I was the sole proprietor. The reckoning was coming, I knew, but I would face it on my own terms, from the safety and strength of a sanctuary built just for me. The email, as expected, was the spark that ignited the wildfire. The ensuing week was a maelstrom of digital fury. My family, realizing their threats and guilt trips were having no effect, escalated their tactics. Tom's lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter, a toothless document full of baseless claims and legal jargon, which Arthur Vance dismissed with a hearty laugh. My mother left tearful voicemails, begging me to be the bigger person and think of the family. Sarah took a different approach, launching a smear campaign on social media. On her lifestyle blog and Instagram, she posted a vaguely worded but clearly targeted story. She wrote about the heartbreak of family betrayal and how a close relative had stolen a cherished family heirloom out of pure spite and selfishness. She painted herself as the victim, a devoted mother whose children were being denied the chance to create memories at a place that was their birthright. Her followers, knowing nothing of the truth, flooded her with messages of sympathy and support, denouncing the anonymous, villainous relative. It was infuriating, but it was also predictable. It was Sarah's standard operating procedure: control the narrative, play the martyr, and turn public opinion into a weapon. For a moment, I was tempted to respond. To post my side of the story with screenshots of her selfish texts and a detailed account of her neglect. But I didn't. Engaging with her on her level would only drag me back into the toxic mire. My grandfather's letter echoed in my mind: build a new foundation. That foundation had to be built on peace, not on public squabbles. So I ignored it. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their social media profiles. I created a digital fortress around myself, and within its walls, I found a quiet space to breathe. The reckoning, when it came, was not digital. It was loud, aggressive, and in person. It happened 2 weeks later, on the first weekend of July. The weekend Sarah had so confidently informed me she had booked out for herself and her friends. I had decided to spend the entire week at the cabin, working remotely and enjoying the tranquility. On Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on the porch, reading a book, when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A large, expensive SUV, Tom's, came roaring up the drive, followed by a second car. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't move. I had installed the security cameras, as I'd warned them, and I had the local sheriff's non-emergency number programmed into my phone. I stayed in my chair, book in hand, and waited. Sarah got out of the passenger seat, her face a mask of thunderous rage. Tom got out of the driver's side, looking equally furious. Her friends, a couple I vaguely recognized from family gatherings, looked confused and uncomfortable. "What do you think you're doing, Emily?" Sarah shrieked, marching towards the porch. "We're here for our vacation. Our friends came all the way from the city." I calmly placed my bookmark in my book and set it down. I stood up, leaning against the porch railing. "I think I'm enjoying a quiet Saturday at my house, Sarah. which is more than I can say for you since you're currently trespassing on my property. Your property, Tom sneered, stepping forward. This is a family cabin, you can't just steal it. I didn't steal it, I said, my voice even and firm. Grandpa gave it to me, he signed the deed. It's a matter of public record. Your lawyer should have been able to figure that out, Tom. Maybe you should ask for a refund. Tom's face turned a dangerous shade of red. You are going to let us in, right now, he demanded, taking a step towards the porch stairs. No, I said simply. I'm not. You are not welcome here. You need to leave, now. Sarah's friends were now backing away towards their car, whispering to each other, clearly wanting no part of this family implosion. We are not leaving, Sarah yelled, her voice cracking with hysteria. My children have been looking forward to this. You are ruining their summer. You are so unbelievably selfish. Selfish? I finally snapped, the years of repressed anger bubbling to the surface. You want to talk about selfish? Let's talk about the hundreds of times I dropped my own life to babysit your kids for free so you could build your precious brand. Let's talk about the countless hours I spent listening to you complain about your petty, first-world problems. Let's talk about how, when I was collapsed on my office floor in agony, so scared I could barely breathe, my own family, my support system, couldn't be bothered to help because of a gallery opening and a pan of macaroni and cheese. My voice was rising with every word, echoing in the quiet mountain air. I spent my entire life being your servant, your therapist, and your doormat. I gave you everything I had, and what did I get in return? Silence. Neglect. And a text message asking me to pick up your kids from soccer while I was lying in a hospital bed. So don't you dare talk to me about selfish. You people are the dictionary definition of the word. They were stunned into silence, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They had never heard me raise my voice, never seen me do anything but quietly absorb their demands. The free ride is over, I continued, my voice now low and trembling with intensity. This cabin is the one thing Grandpa knew you couldn't exploit. He gave it to me to protect it, and to protect me from you. This is my home now, a place where I am the priority, a concept I know is completely foreign to you. I pointed towards the driveway. I am telling you for the last time, get off my property. If you are not gone in the next 2 minutes, I will be calling the sheriff and having you removed for trespassing. Tom took another aggressive step forward. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said, my hand already on my phone. I unlocked it and held it up, my finger hovering over the call button. For a long moment, we were locked in a standoff. I could see the battle raging in their eyes, their entitlement warring with the undeniable reality of the situation. They were used to me folding, to me being the one to back down to keep the peace. But the woman standing before them was a stranger. Finally, with a curse, Tom turned on his heel and stalked back to the car. Sarah stood frozen for another second, her face contorted with a hatred so pure it was almost startling. You will regret this, Emily, she spat. No, Sarah, I replied, my voice steady again. I'm just getting started. She gave me one last venomous look before storming back to the SUV, her friends already in their car and pulling away. I watched as they got in, slammed the doors, and sped down the gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air long after they were gone. When the sound of their engine faded, a profound silence descended on the clearing. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling with adrenaline. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed uncontrollably. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. I had won. The reckoning was over. And in the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the towering pines and the gentle lapping of the lake, I finally, truly, understood what my grandfather had given me. It wasn't just a cabin. It was a battlefield where I had fought for my own soul and emerged victorious. The months following the confrontation at the lake were a study in quiet transformation. The angry calls and texts ceased, replaced by a cold, impenetrable silence from my family. It was clear they had retreated to nurse their wounded pride and, no doubt, to spin a narrative of my villainy to anyone who would listen. But their opinions no longer mattered. Their absence, which would have once felt like a punishment, was now a profound relief. It was like the constant, low-grade hum of a faulty appliance had finally been switched off, leaving behind a peaceful silence in which I could finally hear my own thoughts. I began spending every weekend at the cabin, which I now simply called my place. The city apartment started to feel less like a home and more like a temporary lodging I used for work. My real life was happening at the lake. I learned to identify the local birds by their songs. I planted a small vegetable garden, finding a simple, grounding joy in tending to the rows of tomatoes and zucchini. I bought a used kayak and spent my mornings paddling on the glassy surface of the lake, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. Each act of self-sufficiency, each small moment of solitary peace, was a brick in the new foundation my grandfather had urged me to build. I was no longer Emily the giver, Emily the fixer, Emily the convenience. I was just Emily. And I was discovering that Emily was a person who loved the smell of pine after a rainstorm, who was surprisingly good at baking bread from scratch, and who found more comfort in the company of a good book and a crackling fire than she ever had at a noisy family gathering. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was raking leaves in the yard, a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a sleek, aggressive SUV, but a modest sedan. A woman got out. It was Linda, my colleague from accounting, the one who had held my hand and shown me more kindness than my own mother. I had invited her up for the weekend, a spontaneous act that felt both strange and wonderful. For so long, my social life had been dictated by my family's needs. Inviting someone into my space, simply because I enjoyed their company, was a novel and liberating experience. We spent the weekend talking, laughing, and drinking wine on the porch. I told her the whole story, from the years of servitude to the ruptured appendix to the discovery of my grandfather's letter. She listened without judgment, her eyes filled with a compassionate understanding that I had so desperately craved. "He gave you a gift, Emily," she said, looking out at the lake. "And I don't just mean the cabin." I knew she was right. He had given me permission to choose myself. The true test, I suppose, came around the holidays. I received a stiff, formal card from my mother. It was a Christmas card with a staged family photo of Sarah, Tom, and their 2 smiling children in matching sweaters. There was no personal note, just a pre-printed Happy Holidays and her name signed at the bottom. It was an olive branch, but a pathetic one, an attempt to pretend that nothing had happened, to sweep the ugly truth under the rug of holiday cheer. The old Emily would have seen it as an opening. She would have called, eager for a truce, willing to forgive and forget just to have the semblance of a family again. But I looked at the photo, at their perfect, curated smiles, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a distant, clinical pity. They were trapped in a performance while I was living an authentic life. I didn't respond. I spent Christmas at my place, alone but not lonely. I decorated a small pine tree with twinkling lights, baked cookies, and watched old movies by the fire. On Christmas morning, I woke up not to the chaos of a family Christmas, but to the quiet beauty of a fresh snowfall blan. Keating the trees. I took my kayak out on the icy, still lake, the only sound the gentle dip of my paddle in the water. It was the most peaceful Christmas I had ever had. A few months later, I made a big decision. I put in my notice at my job in the city and found a new position, a similar HR role at a small company in the town near the lake. It was a pay cut, but my life was simpler now. I no longer needed the salary required to maintain a city apartment I barely used. I sold my apartment and moved into the cabin full-time. The sign I had put up, Emily's Place, was no longer just a statement. It was my reality. This was my home, my sanctuary, my life. I had built my new foundation, just as my grandfather had hoped. It was a foundation built not on obligation or guilt, but on self-respect, peace, and the quiet joy of a life lived on my own terms.